And she really believes that we're in the lithium age now. We've got lithium batteries that last so much longer than any other battery I've ever created. We have unusual crystals of something called lithium niobate, which doesn't occur in nature. That may be the future of computer storage that may actually help us with quantum computing and hold massive amounts of data in something as tiny as a cube size of a centimeter across, something that could contain as much information as is in the entire Library of Congress, both physical and digital archives.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. We've got another great show in store for us today, where we have a return guest, Nicholas Pearson, who has been studying crystals and gemstones for the past 20 years. He's the author of 2 books, the Seven Archetypal Stones, Their Spiritual Powers and Teachings, which we've discussed in a previous episode of the podcast. His forthcoming book, Crystals for Karmic Healing, Transform Your Future by Releasing Your Past, will be available by the time you're listening to this podcast. And as well, worth mentioning that he's got another book coming out in the fall of 2017, Crystal Healing for the Heart. Nicholas, really happy to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashton. It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to today.
So for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, to start with, I love rocks. That's why I'm here. The mineral kingdom's always fascinated me. I've just grown to appreciate it from all aspects, from the sort of scientific and industrial applications of minerals to understanding their inner workings. And the thing that's always been the most fascinating to me is wherever we study the science of rocks and minerals, we see a parallel in the spiritual dimension. But in addition to rocks, I practice Reiki. I also make flower essences. I love to just sort of try to be a well-rounded guy. We're having fun with rocks today, though, so we'll stick to that topic.
Well, and there's something that I do for people if they haven't listened to the previous episode together. As much as we're talking about really subtle energies with rocks and stones and such, you still stay very grounded in whatever science we can find about these rocks and minerals and the potential properties they have. So you blend both of those things. It's not a completely sort of ethereal, subtle thing, but you incorporate a lot of the actual what we can verify through science in there, which is something that I personally really appreciate as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my mission. I like to have one foot in each of those kingdoms. I can certainly talk to the scientific, academic people about just the measurable properties of stones, but it really enriches our spiritual understanding of how and why they work for us.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about stones and getting into that more subtle energy side, often when we're talking about subtle energies, the subject of chakras will come up. And so I kind of want to start there today in our exploration to say, aside from the differences of different chakra systems and this and that, so we can stay pretty broad with it, but I wanted to get your opinion for people that are interested in both crystals and stones as well as the chakras. I wanted to get your opinion on, and again, just the whatever system that you're most familiar with, where we can talk about specific qualities of the chakras, so what that means. But if you were to advise somebody on specific stones for each of the chakras, do you have a nice kind of map for that, for people kind of one by one through each of the chakras of what stones work best to help deepen a connection with those chakras?
Yes and no. One of the main things about crystals is that just like snowflakes, which are also crystalline, no two are exactly the same. And it's the same for us. We're kind of living crystals in a manner. So our systems and their systems won't necessarily always align in a regular and predictable way. So the stone that works best on my base chakra may work better on another one for you, or maybe not at all. So we always want to sort of take a step back and go first to having a personal relationship with our crystal helpers. A lot of sources that you look at are going to be aligned with color. So, we typically in the West associate the chakra system as being that sort of ragey bit of color spectrum. But when we reduce crystals to just their color, we omit so many other wonderful things about them. It's a great place for starters. If you have some red jasper or some red garnet and want to place it on the base chakra, they're both very grounding stones. They're going to give you a great effect. But stones do so much more than just what their color hints at as well. So you might find exceptions to the rule, like lapis lazuli, which works very much on the heart, just as much as it does on the throat or the third eye. And then there are some stones that are multicolored. Maybe you've got agate or calcite or varieties of quartz and aventurine, things like fluorite, which occur in virtually every color of the rainbow. We can't reduce it to a single color and single action. So you might require some experimentation. Generally speaking, for our base chakra issues, we want to start with stones that are grounding, supportive, that help us stand our ground. We might look at things like rubies, garnets, hematite. We might also look at some things like obsidian, which is amorphous, non-crystalline, but comes from the depths of the earth and helps us connect to the depths of the earth for that deep-rooted grounding sort of energy. The next chakra up for the second center, most people put orange-colored stones there, like carnelian, maybe some calcite. There's some other, maybe a little bit more exotic minerals. Vanadinite is a wonderful stone for enhancing our second chakra energy. Not only is it creative, but it helps us seek out the beauty in the world. And this chakra also rules over our relationships. So it's a really good one to help us find beauty and goodness in our relationships with the world around us. For the third center, that's our power center. Golden colored stones are wonderful, but you might find a few others that aren't quite gold or yellow that work really well. I love citrine here. Citrine helps us unwind tension and allows us to manifest our fullest potential. And those are both functions of it being related to the yellow ray, not so much because it's yellow colored, but because in esoteric philosophy as well as in gem therapy, we ascribe specific benefits to the rays. And citrine is one of the representatives, if you will, that helps us get in touch with the archetype of yellow ray energy. It's also really good for eliminatory functions. We think about where that chakra is located on our body. It's over all these digestive organs, and eventually we eliminate from there as well. So it's really good for our physiological digestion and elimination too, as well as our mental, when we have a lot to think about, to process, to understand something so we can be empowered by it, as well as release the aspects that aren't serving us. So citrine is probably my go-to stone for that one. At the heart, I have a whole book about stones you can use on the heart coming out later this year. So you're going to see that it's a lot more than just pink or green stones. Most people will immediately go to things like green aventurine or rose quartz. But we can actually look at mineral content. Things like manganese and chromium tend to be really empowering to the heart center. A lot of manganese stones are pink. A lot of chromium stones are green, but it's not always the case. Emerald is a wonderful stone for the heart center. It gets its color from chromium. It's a real good truth-seeking stone.
If I can jump in there for a moment, you said that because of the mineral qualities, they're really good for the heart. Could you explain that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so rather than just looking at color, the sort of net result of a mineral's energy is something that we get from its composition. The elements that combine to form it, its structure or morphology, the geometric arrangements of its internal lattice, things like hardness, diaphaneity, or how well light passes through it, its clarity. All of these things sort of come together. And in the case of manganese-bearing and chromium-bearing minerals, we get activators of the heart chakra. So one of my favorites that contains manganese is rhodonite. Rhodonite is a really good grounding stone, actually, but it also grounds from the emotional level. So when our heart is maybe a little unsettled, it's a great stone for calming down that center. Things that are chromium-bearing tend to be a little bit more spiritually uplifting as well. Just last year, there was a new find of green fluorite in an emerald mine in Colombia. And this has a real heart energy, even though most people wouldn't associate fluorite with it. And it's because of that chromium content. So, there's so many different facets to the mineral kingdom. And when we can look at what they're made from, we often get a deeper picture than just what they look like.
Excellent. Thank you. And then so that we were in the heart, and then you're moving on to the throat.
Yeah. So, this is our level of communication, expression. It's our ability to create change in the world as well. So lapis is a good stone here because it unites the forces of the heart and the mind. And when they come together, the natural byproduct of that is being able to create unilateral action between the two of them in the world around us. That often comes from speaking what's on our mind or in our heart. So it can enhance our expression in that way. Another stone that I really love using at the throat chakra is aquamarine. Aquamarine is great because it puts us in the divine flow, allows us to receive and release just like the ebb and flow of the tides. And when we do this, there's no need to hold on to things like our fears, our limitations. And so it gives us the courage to just go with the flow. Aquamarine does a whole lot more, and we'll actually come back to that in a little while. But from there we can look at the third eye. Amethyst is probably the stone par excellence for the third eye, not just because it's purple or violet in color, but because it connects us to this ocean of wisdom that is within us. When we look at how it forms, it almost grows in a sort of labyrinth pattern. It helps us really go to the still point in our mind and allows us to act as vessels of spirit, recognize that our physical bodies are just manifestations of the spiritual realm. And that's the level at which we become the most intuitive and the most connected to, the ethers. So it's a wonderful stone. But there are plenty of other great stones for the third eye. One that I particularly love is fluorite. We talked about chromium-bearing fluorite for the heart, but fluorite in general helps to order the mind. And this is a very mental center. We often like to give it a more intuitive approach, but it is still, our mental foundation. And fluorite is cubic. So when you look at its crystal forms, if you have a natural shape of it, it often splits into crystal shapes that resemble cubes, or octahedrons, which are kind of like two pyramids stuck together, base to base. And they have this really regular symmetry and geometry that's very predictable. And it really helps us with our mental foundation. Kind of like when you're a little kid and you have building blocks. If you don't build a firm foundation on the bottom level, have all those little cubes or blocks stuck next to each other with not a whole lot of space in between, then you build a really unstable foundation and the whole thing's going to come tumbling down. What fluorite does on that mental and intuitive level is build a strong foundation of our thought processes. So that way we can, look into things with clarity and have the discipline to follow through on whatever those actions are, whether we receive them intuitively or logically. It works pretty well on both sides of that. And then for the crown, this is sort of multifaceted. Particularly, you could use selenite if you want to have a real high, clear, but gentle energy that comes in. Selenite is a very soft mineral. It grows out of water. It's considered an evaporite. So when you have a really concentrated solution that has all the right ingredients for selenite in it, as the water evaporates, it leaves these really delicate crystals behind. And they're wonderful for getting us in touch with our higher selves and our perspective of the world around us. Quartz in general is great for the crown, especially if you're using clear quartz, really bright, brilliant crystals like Herkimer diamonds. There are a variety of quartz from New York. Even proper diamonds. The best kind we can use are those that have real good clarity, color, and brilliance and exhibit fire in all 7 colors of the rainbow. But I know we don't all have access to diamonds like that. So that's why we have so many other substitutes. And they're, less well-known minerals that work really well in the crown center. I love herderite. That's one I've recently fallen in love with. It's the stone of evolution. It's said that in addition to helping us evolve spiritually, it actually prepares our physiology for evolution by allowing our physical brains and nervous systems to adapt to the incoming, this flux of energies that's happening now in this time of transition. So although that's not the most common mineral, it's a great one to use in the comfort of your own home. It's one of those things that can kind of rock the boat a little bit because it's a very intense energy, but it's a great crown stone as well.
Speaking of super intense energies, I have friends that can't even be in the same room as moldavite, which that hasn't come up in our topic yet, but I know that people are really sensitive to that. They literally just start freaking out with all the energy from it. Those are all amazing, and thank you so much. I want to. Some of these might overlap, but my next kind of question is, you've been teaching for years. Obviously, you're a prolific writer. This is so much of your life, and I'm wondering for the average person. Sort of chakra conversation aside, are there could you name, let's say, 5 stones that really kind of are great foundational stones for everybody? I mean, I'm a big fan of Batman and the tool belt idea, that we all kind of need our own little utility belt, that like we've got our little tools that just, hey, when we need something, we got to be able to use it right away. So what would be like the utility belt version of gemstones for you, for the average person? I know it's a very personal thing, but I mean, as just like hey, these are great all-around stones.
Yeah, that's a great topic. For starters, I'd say start with quartz. And I'm going to go pretty generically on this. Find the ones you're attracted to. If quartz is purple, we call it amethyst. If it's pink, we call it rose quartz. If it's massive with tiny inclusions that make it green, we call it aventurine. But anything in the quartz family, whether it's crystalline or non-crystalline, and you can see that brilliant refractive prism face, it doesn't matter. Pick the ones you're the most attracted to. And especially if you've been with it for a while, you've been collecting stones for a good long while, try to stay current with what's coming out of the earth. All these new and unusual mineral specimens that are popping up here and there, especially in parts of the world like Inner Mongolia. There are some amazing new things that the earth is giving us. Even though quartz is such a common and popular mineral, we're getting it in formations you've never seen before. And these new formations are really well adapted to what's going on our planet right now, and therefore it represents the lessons that we all need to sort of adapt to. But even if you just start with some basics, go pick some tumbled quartz crystals, maybe some tumbled amethyst, but a well-rounded group of quartz is a great starting point. Next, I would recommend rhodonite. I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but rhodonite is one of those go-to stones for me, and mostly because it's very utilitarian. And I actually have an example of this from my own life. What rhodonite does, it helps to settle and support our emotional foundation, like the seedbed of emotional patterns that we build our entire perception of the world on. And if we don't have a very well put together emotional foundation, then anytime an emotion pops up, our immediate reaction is to overreact. That might be panic, it might be worry, it might be anxiety, it might be fear. It could be different for all of us. So what rhodonite does is it grounds and settles everything in the emotional level and sort of restructures that emotional foundation so that way it's easier to process the emotions as they come. And several years back, I used to ride a motorcycle and I was hit by a car and I was wearing 2 gemstones, amethyst and rhodonite. And I have struggled with anxiety for a good part of my life, and I'd pretty much mastered it at that point. But when you get hit by a car driving a motorcycle, you expect a little bit of panic. And the strangest thing is that everything felt, even though it was a lot to process, like it was totally under control. When I was in the ER, eventually they had to take my rocks away from me in order to do x-rays. And the moment they took them off, I started to feel that familiar flutter of the heart and butterfly in the stomach that said, anxiety was on its way. And when I got them back, everything settled back down. So it really can work that quickly, that intensely, and that effectively. Rhodonite is just a great go-to stone for all of us, especially if you're practicing crystal therapy with others. It's a stone you'll probably see a lot with.
I think it's one that I might have to surround my computer with whenever I log on to Facebook these days. So have rhodonite everywhere to keep my thoughts collected and my emotions calm.
Yeah, it is just a great all-around stone. Next, another stone I touched on earlier is aquamarine. Aquamarine is so incredibly versatile. So aqua forms as a variety of beryl. Beryl is a family of gems, just like quartz comes in every color. Beryl does come in a lot of colors, at least. And aquamarine is one of the more popular varieties. It's a great stone for helping us be in that sort of flux state where we can release what isn't serving us and accept what's coming to us. But it's also a stone of truth. It allows us to look at things for what they are, and it taps into the sort of spiritual blueprint. Now, when we look at the shape of a natural aquamarine crystal, it is hexagonal. It exhibits an incredible amount of symmetry and order in it. True hexagonal crystals are the only ones that actually have 4 axes of symmetry. All other crystal systems only have 3. So it kind of goes to the next level on a morphological or geometric level. And when you look at X-ray diffractions of these crystals, when they bombard them with X-ray patterns in front of photographic film, the little particles that come off of them form the shape of the flower of life. So this is a type of mineral that's very keyed into our spiritual blueprints, our spiritual templates. And it brings us into a state of energetic liquidity. What that means is, at any given moment, some part of you, whether it's a physical part like a cell in your body or a tiny little molecule inside that cell, or a non-physical part, such as your subtle anatomy, your thoughts, your emotions, your aura, your chakras, they can be in a more solid, sort of crystalline or particle-based state, or they can be in a more energetic, wave-like state. And energetic liquidity is the ability to sort of transfer between these two states with ease. As we age, as we develop very repetitive thoughts and patterns and habits in our lives, we tend to get stuck more in that manifest or crystalline state. And we can only retrieve the information, the spiritual encoding in our spiritual blueprints, when we can go back to that wave-like pattern. So aquamarine, especially if we use it to imprint water, helps us eliminate the toxins, whether they're physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, that are sort of gluing us down in that solid manifest state, so we can go back to that energetic state and retrieve the perfection that's in our blueprint and correct the course that we're on. And that can be, clearing the toxins in our joints, bringing a sort of youthfulness, mobility, lack of pain to the joints if we have hard incrustations there. But it can also be in our minds when we're really set and solid in a particular mindset. It helps to flush out the mental toxins that are keeping us from growing. So aquamarine is just such a versatile gem. It works on the emotions, on the mind, on the physical body. And it's one of those really rare blueprint-oriented stones that really works on the causal or karmic level as well. We can use it to release karma that is just ready to go. The next one I'd recommend is mostly because of the kind of world we live in that's so technologically oriented, and this is shungite. Shungite's gotten really popular in the last few years. It's been used for a long time in Russia as a traditional home remedy in the area it comes from, in Karelia. They use shungite-infused waters to treat internal conditions as well as skin eruptions. It can be ground into a paste and applied to the skin. There are entire rooms that are coated in shungite panels that are supposed to be very therapeutic to sit in. But one of the reasons that it's so beneficial to us is we swim through this vibrational sea all day long. And some of those vibrations are naturally occurring, from the earth, from the building materials in our homes, from, the other beings we meet, whether they're physical or not. But a lot of them are also artificial, and those artificial ones can be detrimental, like our cell phones, our computers, a lot of the lights that we use. And what shungite does is it sort of neutralizes the negative impact of those fields. It doesn't take them away or deflect them. It actually allows you to integrate them as if they were positive fields, as if they were sort of spinning in the same direction, if you will, as those life-affirming natural fields. Shungite's also very subtly grounding. It can be used to purify water. I mean, putting a chunk of it in your pitcher of water is not going to filter anything out. You actually have to filter it through, just like you would, filtering water through a coffee maker to make some sort of change happen. So if you just throw it in there, it's going to imprint your water, and that might positively impact it on some other sort of structural level, and won't take anything out, though. So it's sort of a myth that goes around out there. But shungite water is great for you. Really a very evolutionary stone. It contains carbon molecules that we didn't actually think occurred terrestrially. We've only found them in things like fulgurites, where lightning strikes the earth. That's a result of very unique activity, as well as in meteoric rocks. But these complex molecules are called fullerenes. And in the case of shungite, they're these microscopic tubes made out of carbon. And I think that's really where a lot of its positive benefit comes from. And my last one on the list of 5 would be anything with lithium. You can't go wrong with a lithium-based stone. If we think about what lithium bicarbonate and other lithium compounds are used for medicinally, they're the things that mellow out our moods and even us out and give us a sort of even keel to navigate through life. Spiritually, they do the same thing, but without the negative effects that you can get. So things like lepidolite, some forms of tourmaline, like pink and green tourmaline or watermelon tourmaline, as well as some blues. You've got things like pedalite, cedarite, lithium quartz, amblygonite, kunzite, spodumene, tryphane, hiddenite. Lithium-rich stones are one of those really evolutionary stones. And some years ago, I have a dear friend who's an old-school rock hound as well as a soil engineer. So she's a brilliant scientist. But if you look at how we've sort of labeled all the previous ages, we've got, the Stone Age, we have the Bronze Age, we went into the Iron Age, and she really believes that we're in the Lithium Age now. We've got lithium batteries that last so much longer than any other battery I've ever created. We have unusual crystals of something called lithium niobate, which doesn't occur in nature. That may be the future of computer storage that may actually help us with quantum computing and hold massive amounts of data in something as tiny as a cube size of a centimeter across, something that could contain as much information as is in the entire Library of Congress, both physical and digital archives. So lithium is something that's really tuned into fast-paced growth, but it is such a gentle, heart-centered energy. It unites our spiritual understanding of the world with our emotional or heart-based perspective of the world, and allows us to sort of reconcile the difference between the two of them. So any lithium-rich stones you can get your hands on are going to be wonderful for you.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. I hope that that listeners go out and experiment with some of these, try them in their tool belt, and then come back. Either talk to us on the show, on our Facebook group, or reach out to you and let us all know how all of these things are working with everybody. Because I love the tips, and I love that everything is so grounded too in the science behind it, and that you're informing these more subtle qualities from that. Again, I do appreciate that so much. Now, I know a lot of really energetically sensitive people, and when they're walking around, they tend to like static electricity, kind of clinging things to it. Energy can often get kind of stuck, in particular when they're so sensitive on them. What stone or stones would you recommend to help sort of energetically cleanse people? And is there a particular way which you encourage people to do that?
So as far as practicing good spiritual hygiene, if you will, and keeping your energy field clear, you might have to experiment to find the perfect one. I think shungite is a great go-to stone for that. In addition to the real measurable energy fields, like those harmful EMFs, it really helps us with the subtle energies too. It's almost like an energetic sponge. In some ways, it absorbs the sort of icky mojo, for lack of a better technical term, so that way we don't have to process it ourselves. And other things that we can do, selenite, especially in its more fibrous forms, like the satin spar, we can use that as sort of an energetic sponge by moving it through our energy field, and it can sort of dislodge things that are stuck to us because it forms out of an aqueous solution. It has this very cleansing, watery energy while still maintaining this pure, brilliant light connection to it. And so it helps to clean out our energy fields. Then, of course, we also need to make sure we cleanse our stones. So, whatever stones you're using to maintain the integrity of your personal bubble, just remember those stones have their own personal bubble too, and we have to take care of them afterwards.
And so that maybe that's a specific thing for the stones, but I think that's a sort of a great segue of how do we take care of our crystals? What's the best way to cleanse them, like you're talking about there? But also, when you start getting into stones and crystals, people talk about charging them, like you leave them out underneath a full moon and these sorts of things. What are some basic care tips to taking care of your stones and gemstones, crystals?
Sure. So I'm going to start with talking about cleansing. We'll kind of move with each of these things we do, like charging or programming and activating stuff in sequence. But we want to start with knowing how to effectively cleanse. And for every book you're going to find on crystals, there are going to probably be at least 5 different methods of cleansing inside it. And some of them work really well for all minerals. Some of them are not so great for some. And they all kind of fall into 2 different categories. We have physics-based cleansing methods. For some scientific reason or model, they have a measurable effect on us. And then we have faith-based methods of cleansing, which only work because we believe in them. But the beauty of the human mind and the mineral kingdom is because we believe in them, that's sufficient. So some things like burning sage, using intention or prayer, sunlight, moonlight, some of the water-based methods for cleansing that you're going to find, as well as I've seen, soaking it in salt or flower petals. These are actually all faith-based. In a scientific laboratory, the only change that takes place because we believe in it. And this is something that Marcel Vogel, he was a research scientist with IBM for 27 years. When he left the traditional scientific arena, he started studying healing and spirituality and psychic phenomena, and eventually settled into crystals. And, those people who were staunch believers that salt water was going to cleanse their rocks, it really did. But in a cold scientific setting, with no expectation, it did nothing that he could measure. So some physics-based methods, they work with the crystal lattice in some way or another, would be something like sound. And it might not just be playing music or chiming some bells or singing bowl. We can also use toning or chanting. And you just kind of intuitively release the most unpleasant guttural sound that's going to come out. It might be one pitch. It might kind of move between different notes. If you just intuitively let this sound come out, what sound is, it's a vibrating column of air. So it is molecules that are in motion, and those moving molecules interact with the molecules out of which your crystals are made. And it's kind of like wringing out a sponge. When you squeeze it, whatever information or energy is inside the crystal comes out and leaves a blank slate for whatever else is in there. You can also use the breath. If we couple it with intention, it becomes both physics-based and faith-based. If you do have a copy of the Seven Archetypal Stones, on page 5 in the introduction, there's an adaptation of Marcel Vogel's method, the one that he scientifically proved worked, that uses both the breath and the mind. So there are lots of really great ways. If you have stones that are water stable, then you can use water. Alternating warm and cool water will do the best job because it actually causes the crystal lattice to expand and contract, and that kind of mimics that wringing out of the sponge.
And what would be some real simple examples of water-based stones?
So something that would be safe for water would be anything in the quartz family for the most part. Avoid crystal clusters because they might be fragile where they're attached to their matrix. But, rose quartz, amethyst, smoky quartz, a lot of tourmalines would be safe for this. You want something that's got a high hardness to it, maybe 6 or above on that Mohs scale of hardness. But some softer stones like selenite, calcite, fluorite, malachite, these are things that if they don't actually dissolve, you might actually build a finish on them. And some formations that are more fibrous can fall apart on you. So water can be damaging. Salt can scratch a lot of things, especially if the hardness is less than or equal to the mineral halite, which is what salt is. Sunlight bleaches many, many, many colored stones. If you've all had that beautiful piece of amethyst that you left in the window to charge in the sunlight and you came back a week later and it was really pale, it's because the sunlight actually causes the stone to bleach. So we can do as much harm to our crystals physically as the good we're trying to promote etherically. So that's why I prefer the consciousness-based methods, the ones where we use breath and mind together, because then we can't hurt anything. We can't scratch it. We're not going to cause it to fall apart. We won't bleach it. So those are great tools for you.
Awesome. Now, one thing, I lived on this tropical island for a number of years, and people were very much into energetics and stones and crystals, and very skeptical about Wi-Fi waves and cell phones and all this. And you touched on it a little bit earlier, and I just want to take a moment to see if we can expand on it a little bit to say, and I think it was shungite that you mentioned was really good for clearing out these types of spaces. For people that have a lot of that energy, maybe they're in an apartment building and they look at their available Wi-Fi, and there's like 50 different ones just radiating everywhere around them, and there's all this stuff, and they want to create a nice, let's say, shield around themselves for that, or help to cleanse some of that. In addition to shungite, do you have any other stones that are very effective for helping to clear out some of those strong electric energetic fields?
Yeah, totally. Smoky quartz is a great one. So smoky quartz is unlike most of the other quartzes, which get their color from the presence of some other mineral substance in there, like with amethyst, for example. It's got some iron in a very specific oxidized state that makes us view it as purple. But with smoky quartz, it's actually the absence of something else. There are little vacancies in its crystal lattice. Sometimes it's caused by trying to fit something in that's too large, like aluminum, and so it has to leave a space somewhere else. But where there are these little holes in the structure it's made from, it absorbs light, and it absorbs it equally from all ends of the spectrum. So therefore, it's kind of like a little vacuum cleaner, if you will, energetically speaking. So we can use smoky quartz to sort of regulate the purity of the energy around us. It is still very grounding, depending on how it looks, how clear or how cloudy, how dark or how pale it is. It may be gentler in your energy field. It might be a little bit more intensive. So you can kind of feel that out on your own. Another really good one to wear if you're in this kind of circumstance regularly is pink tourmaline. Pink tourmaline is a really strong, clear, emotionally purifying gem, but it can also help to strengthen our aura, so that way it is less penetrable to outside forces. And this might be someone else's thoughts or feelings, but it might also be those electromagnetic fields that we're exposed to. Fluoride is another one that's really frequently recommended to keep around your computer. It's got this very mental energy anyway and helps us develop self-discipline. So at the very least, it's going to help it get your work done faster at the computer, so you might need to spend a little less time by it. But it may also help us with that sort of energetic protection, if you will.
That's interesting because in Thailand, I used to have fluoride all around my little laptop that I had specifically for that. And you just kind of refresh the memory of it because I don't have any on my desk here. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's right. Get some fluoride around the computer.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, awesome. This has been so amazing. I mean, you're so knowledgeable, and I appreciate everything that you've shared with us today. Where can people find out more about you, your books? I know you go around and teach. Tell us the best ways to connect with you.
Yeah, so you can definitely find me on Facebook. Just search my name. You can also find my professional page on Facebook. It's The Luminous Pearl. And any moment now, maybe by the time you hear this, my website will be up and running, and that's going to be www.theluminous.pearl.com. And you can find my books in major bookstores, on Amazon.com. You can visit my publisher's website, which is innertraditions.com, and they'll have a list of author events, including mine, as well as, all the books that are to come.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I really encourage people to go out and get your books. In particular, I'd say for those that might be a little bit on the fence, they're not really sure about stones and crystals and all this kind of stuff, and maybe it's a little far out for them. One of the things that I appreciate so much is that you keep things as grounded as possible with this. So for those that might be a little bit more skeptical, they're going to get a lot more of the science behind it than many of the other stones books out there that I've seen. So really encourage people to check out your work, connect with you on social media as well, because I know that you're on there pretty regularly. So that's incredible. Wonderful. For all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you have enjoyed and learned a lot. Hope you all have a wonderfully present moment, and thank you so much for listening. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.